Welcome back to the Accessible Art History YouTube channel. This week, we are going to travel to Washington, D.C. and examine 5 incredible works at the National Gallery of Art. Obviously, there are far more than 5 masterpieces in this museum, but this is meant to be a hits list. Each of these pieces represents a fantastic moment in art history, so keep watching to explore them. The National Gallery of Art was officially established in 1937, though work began several years earlier. Great American businessman Andrew Mellon possessed a large personal art collection. Partially out of national pride, and partially for a tax write-off, Mellon conceived of using what he owned to form a museum. Mellon's plan was bolstered by an unexpected move by the Soviet government. In 1930, the treasury of the Soviet Union was bare and needed an influx of income. So, the decision was made to sell off works held at the Hermitage Museum. This collection had been assembled by centuries of Russian rulers, and there were several paintings that Mellon had his eye on. In all, he was able to acquire 21 paintings to help bolster the fledgling National Gallery of Art's collection. On March 24, 1937, which also happened to be Mellon's birthday, an act of Congress officially set up the National Gallery of Art. The United States government was gifted both the art collection and the funds set aside for the building. This was done so Mellon could avoid tax evasion charges. Today, the National Gallery of Art is comprised of 3 sections. The first is the original West Building. It has a beautiful neoclassical design that matches its location. In the 1970s, famed architect I.M. Pei designed a more modern expansion called the East Building. Finally, in 1999, the 6.1-acre sculpture garden was opened. Altogether, the 3 elements of the National Gallery of Art make it the 12th largest museum in the world. 4.4 million people visit it each year, making it the 8th most visited museum. One of the biggest draws of the National Gallery of Art is the only Leonardo da Vinci painting on American soil. This portrait of a young woman was painted between 1474 and 1478. Art historians have identified her as Ginevra da Benci, a young Florentine noblewoman. This work was purchased by the National Gallery from the Liechtenstein royal family for the insane, at the time, sum of $5 million. Ginevra is most famous for her cool, almost aloof look. Unlike da Vinci's most famous work, the Mona Lisa, there is no warmth in her expression. She regards the viewer with little interest and her mouth is tight. Although the bottom third of the painting has been cut off, it can be assumed that her hands would have been shown folded at the bottom of the frame. There are a few ways that viewers can identify Ginevra as a noble woman. First, her hair is finely curled and styled. Secondly, her clothes, while simple in design, are clearly well made. Lastly is the portrait itself. It was common in Florence during the 15th century to have portraits made of young women on the occasion of their marriage. Through historical records, it has been discovered that Ginevra was married around this time at the age of 16. A small fun fact about this work is the pun that da Vinci included in the background. Behind the sitter is a juniper bush. Not only is it a symbol of feminine virtue, but the word juniper is a play on Ginevra's name. This small but fun detail reminds us of da Vinci's more playful side. This contrasts with Ginevra's more stern and stoic attitude. The next work on this list is the Annunciation scene by the great Netherlandish artist Jan van Eyck. Painted around 1436, this piece was originally the left side of a triptych, but is now on an independent canvas. The story of the Annunciation comes from the Gospel of Luke, and is when the angel Gabriel tells the Virgin Mary that she is to bear the Son of God. She is inside the Jewish temple and is devoutly reading the book of Isaiah. The Holy Spirit is also present. It is symbolized by the dove flying in on a beam of light. The major theme of this work is the transition between the old and new. There is a clear distinction between light and dark. The Romanesque architecture gradually gives way to the more modern Gothic style. If the viewer looks close enough, there are small panels with a triumphal scene from the Old Testament. They include David and Goliath and Samson in the Philistine temple. For art historians, one of the most remarkable aspects of this piece is the way that Van Eyck portrayed the figures of Mary and Gabriel. They are overly large, way too big for the space that they are in. There is a weight, almost heftiness about them, which seems unusual for such heavenly figures. Most of this comes from the rich, intricately woven fabric that make up their clothing. Every detail of this piece has a purpose. Around 1460, Roger van der Weyden painted this portrait of an unidentified woman. However, like the one of Ginevra de Benci we already examined, there are clues that identify her as a member of the noble class. Her clothes are clearly made from fine cloth and by an expert seamstress. Her hairline has been plucked to be quite a bit higher than it would have been naturally. This was the height of fashion during the 15th century, especially in the Netherlands. Finally, the sitter is wearing a few elaborate rings on her fingers. Jewelry was almost always reserved solely for the upper classes of society. This work is often described as a revolution in portraiture. This is because it has the inkling of individuality. Yes, the sitter is still made up to be the ideal of Gothic beauty. With her narrow build, previously mentioned high hairline, light brows, and pale skin, she does fit that mold. However, her headdress is a different story. Traditionally, these were worn to preserve modesty, but this one frames the sitter's face and draws attention to it. The thin, gossamer material does little to hide her face from the viewer. Monet is one of the most beloved artists in the history of art. While he is most famous for his paintings of water lilies, his series on the Rouen Cathedral highlights his dedication to the study of impression and light. Working in 1894, Monet would go to the cathedral at different times of day to see how the light would affect his perception of the facade. This particular piece was created during the daytime. This work truly captures the way that light plays with the viewer's impression of a specific scene. Monet used soft pastel tones to capture the daytime light. His brush strokes mimic the stonework of the facade. He did include a few figures, but they only provide scale to show just how large the cathedral is. There are not many shadows, given the time of day, but there are a few in the main doorways. By working on the same subject at different times, Monet helped to change the perception of how light works. Although artists understood for centuries how lighting would affect their work, Monet was one of the first to use light as a medium. During the Dutch Golden Age, there were many artists vying for attention in work. This particular piece was actually attributed to Frans Hals until 1949 when the National Gallery of Art acquired it, but this self-portrait was actually painted by Judith Leyster around 1633. Leyster shows herself in the middle of creating a work, with a large smile on her face. Not only was she a talented painter, but she was the first woman to be admitted to the St. Luke Guild. As jovial as this scene is, it most likely did not take place in real life. Firstly, Judith is wearing an elaborate outfit. This was most likely her nicest one, and it is doubtful that she would have risked ruining it with spilled oil paints. In addition, the figure on the canvas has not been able to be matched to any known works of Leyster's. This painting has an intimate air to it. Leyster turns around, almost surprised, as if the viewer has just entered the studio. They are close to her, almost as if she is inviting them to look at the piece she is working on. She works hard to break down the barrier between viewer and creator. The National Gallery of Art has a truly incredible collection. This is quite a feat, because unlike other museums around the world, America did not have a royal collection to form a foundation. But, thanks to Andrew Mellon and his generosity, the country has a space that can rival many. These are only 5 pieces of this collection, so if you're in Washington, D.C., make sure to stop by and see them all.